So you've been told that a life of self-sufficiency, living off the land, living off grid, is beneficial, and it is, but what if I told you that it's nearly impossible? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you're anything like me, you've had a dream of living off the land, off grid, growing all your own food, doing things that maybe would make you a little bit more self-sufficient, than relying on the infrastructure that we have built now, right? The farming practices that we have now, the water, the grid, electric, that sort of thing. I've had those same thoughts. I've had those same dreams too. I think that when you see a lot of what has happened in the world for all of eternity, and you see what is happening recently in various parts of the world, and you just sit down to think a little bit about the reliance that we have on systems, right? Agriculture, common agriculture practices, the infrastructure. It's funny. We have a storm blow through. We lose power for a day, 2 days, 3 days, and we almost don't know what to do. We don't know how to live. We don't know how to survive. And sometimes I think about that with food, right? Sometimes if you think about it, what happens if we were to run out of food at the grocery store? What would happen if we weren't able to import some things that we needed to import? What would happen if, we ran into a drought? It's just, life is fragile. Our infrastructure is fragile. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the mix of the everyday that we forget about that. We think about how reliant we are on gasoline in our vehicles, and I could go on and on and on. But the point really that I want to talk about is mainly food. Is it possible to live self-sufficiently, to grow your own food? 100%, right? I'm talking no reliance on, like I said, common farming practices, no reliance on, getting cattle from farms, pork from farms, all the tomatoes, all the vegetables, everything that you would need to live a healthy lifestyle, right? Is it possible? And I think the short answer, and there's nuance here, but I think the short answer is no, with the current systems, lifestyle that we have now. And that's what I want to talk about here today. I think people romanticize, and I'll put my hand in the pot, hand in the middle of the table for this too. People romanticize living this off-grid lifestyle. But if you think about it historically, most people in our human history haven't been able to achieve that. They haven't been able to live completely on their own, isolated, growing all of their own food that they need, growing all of their own, or raising all their own animals that they need. That's not a historical thing that's happened in humanity. And I think we have to remember that. So, if we're wanting to achieve this self-sufficiency, we need to really think about the guardrails that we're putting around it, the infrastructure that we're putting around it, to help us achieve that. The first reason why I think it's almost impossible or impossible in the way that we live now to be 100% self-sufficient is because it takes a ton of time. If you go back in history and you think about how people before, modern agriculture practices have been in place, how are people able to live off the land? And I think there's a few ways. So if you go way, way back, it was mostly a hunter-gatherer type of household or type of economy. I guess we use the word economy. People spent from the time the sun rose to the time the sun set foraging for food, finding food, hunting food, processing food, preserving food. And simply most of us nowadays don't have the time to do so. We have a job. I have a full-time job. We have obligations, whether it be taking kids to and from school, whether it be attending to hobbies, whether it be driving here to there. The lion's share of our days are spoken for, right? And self-sufficiency requires all the time in the day. So on one hand, if I do think that if things were to turn as a society and we had to rely on ourselves, those certain things that do take a ton of time in our day would probably go away, right? Mainly a job, mainly driving places, mainly school, recreational activities. Those things would probably go away, or at least be in significant jeopardy of being the same that they are now, which would open up a lot of time for us to be able to spend, tending to the gardens and the farms and hunting and raising animals and that sort of thing. But the first reason why I think that it's almost impossible is the way that we live now would not allow it. There's simply not enough time in the day. The other limitation, and it's cool because there's been this movement that's kind of debunking a lion's share of this limitation. But to live self-sufficiently, you have to have access to land. It doesn't have to be a lot of land. I'm in a suburb. I have a 1/4 of an acre lot. I grow lots and lots of things here, but that being said, I don't grow nearly enough to live self-sufficiently. I don't have nearly enough tomato plants, nearly enough peppers, nearly enough potatoes, and quite frankly, I don't really have the space to do so. And again, we're talking 100% self-sufficiency. I have enough space and I could build enough infrastructure with what I have now to grow a lot of the fruits and vegetables that I would need to provide for my family, but it wouldn't be enough. Maybe if I was alone, it was just me here, but it's not. I have a family to take care of here too. And so, access to land is something that, while we don't need 20 acres, we don't need 10 acres, we don't need 5 acres to have enough space to produce a self-sufficient lifestyle, it does require space, it does require land. You have to have enough dirt to plant all the tomatoes and the vegetables and the squash and the cucumbers. You have to have enough land to, raise maybe some chickens or raise pigs or a couple cows. You have to have space to do so. And the simple fact of the matter is that a lot of us do not have access to that. Now, the beautiful thing about living in the United States is that there's a lot of land around. So we can choose to change our lifestyle, give us access to the land that would be required to produce a self-sufficient lifestyle. But the reality for most of us is that we don't have that, and we haven't made the choice to pursue that sort of thing. So another reason why it would be very difficult to live 100% self-sufficiently is you have to have a really wide breadth of knowledge about a lot of things to live self-sufficiently. Some of those being growing a variety of types of fruits and vegetables. Think about all the different types of things you would have to grow, and not only grow, but grow them very efficiently. You'd have to be an expert in growing tomatoes, potatoes, cucumbers, squash. You'd have to be an expert in having an orchard, right? If you want fruits, pears, apples, that sort of thing. You'd have to be an expert in how to manage soil. You'd have to be an expert in so many different things. How to prune, how to harvest seeds, how to plant seeds, where to do it. There's so much that you would have to have a very thorough understanding of, and quite frankly, that's a lot for one person or even a couple or a family to manage. Again, going back to that point I made about time, you'd have to dedicate so much time and have so much knowledge around how to do these things very sufficiently, because the reality is, as hobby gardeners, if our garden fails completely, right, if we have a complete drought, we have no access to water, everything burns up, dries out, it's okay, right? We can still go to the grocery store. We don't have that sort of pressure on our backs to produce something that would sustain our family. But if we were to be 100% self-sufficient, we would have that pressure to produce and produce well for our family. And quite frankly, that's something that I don't think a lot of people have the capacity to do. Again, how do you get the knowledge for everything as an individual? It would take a long time. Now, I think that there have been cases where many people have shown to be able to have that knowledge, but usually when you see that, it's people that have spent years and years, maybe a lifetime, accumulating that knowledge to do so. Also, when you think about self-sufficiency too, outside of food, you have to think about how to produce power. Do you have the knowledge to produce solar power? Do you have the knowledge to preserve water? Do you have the knowledge to do all of the things outside of just food production to be able to process that food and preserve that food? Which leads me right into my next point. It's great to grow a bunch of things, right? So I think a lot of people could be successful with the right amount of land, the right amount of time, and growing a large volume of food. But what happens in the wintertime, right? You have to have the knowledge to preserve food as well. You have to have the space to preserve food as well. For me, I don't have that knowledge. I think it'd be really cool to eventually get there. I'm working toward that with the limited time and access to space that I have. But it's one thing to grow the food, but you have to make sure that that food can be sustainable and sustain you in the times where it's not growing. Me being in the Midwest, we have a growing season, let's call it, March to late October. Maybe there's some winter crops, yes, that you could stretch that a little bit, but it gets very cold here, where things won't grow, everything dies back. I would have to be able to preserve that food by canning or storing in various ways. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people have knowledge of to sustain, again, back to the theme of this video, to sustain something or somebody or a family all year round without any reliance on anybody else. I want to take a break from this discussion to invite you to join the Dixon Claim Garden Club. It is a club of the followers of this channel for gardeners that are like-minded. They want to show off a little bit. They want to ask questions. They want to see maybe what I'm doing. I post frequently on their photos, some videos of things that I do that I don't post on YouTube. So if that interests you, the link is in the description to the Facebook group, or you can go to Facebook and search Dixon Claim Garden Club. You can request to join, and yeah, be part of the club, be part of the community. It's growing quickly with the recent growth of this channel, so I would encourage you to do so. Lastly, I am recording lots of new videos, lots of new content, and I have lots of plans in the future to make more and different styles of content too that I'm very excited about. So if you like these sorts of discussions, if you like how-tos, if you like to see what I'm doing in the garden, what I'm harvesting, what I'm planting, I would highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel as well. Okay, so kind of rounding the bases, we spent a lot of time talking about why it's impossible, why it's very difficult to live a self-sustained lifestyle, right? Particularly around food production. But let's talk about how I think that we could actually do this thing if we put our minds to it. And there's one word that I want to share with you all that I think really sums it up, and it is community, right? So we talked about time being a factor in not being able to live a self-sustained lifestyle. We talked about space. We talked about lack of knowledge. All of these things can be remedied with community. And it's something that I'm exploring pretty deeply. Early on in my life, I didn't place a high priority on community, on spending time with others. It's really easy to do in this world that we live in now, is to live a life that doesn't require, and I say require very specifically, interaction with a lot of other people. We can go to our jobs, we can spend time at home, we can go to the grocery store, we can do all of these things that don't require other people. And again, roll with me because I know jobs require other people, going to the store requires other people, but you get my point. And we can live in a very isolated manner, right? And I think we're seeing that. I think a lot of people are feeling that these days, that they're more alone than ever, even though we're more connected, quote unquote, than we ever have been before. But I think the answer to being able to live a self-sustained lifestyle is community. If you had somebody with some land, it doesn't have to be a lot, but you had someone with some land that was an expert in raising chickens, and they produced poultry and they produced eggs for a small community. Maybe you have someone that does really well with tomatoes and potatoes, and they specialize in that and they have the space to do so. Maybe you have somebody that has the expertise in food preservation, and all they do is they process and preserve all of the food that the other pieces of the community produce. Maybe you have somebody that's great at cooking, right? And they can produce at a larger scale food for the community that the community raises. Maybe you have someone, again, I'm going on and on, that's a great hunter-gatherer, right? Or I should say hunter. And they can, go and produce venison or produce what have you. Or again, maybe you have someone that can raise cattle, right? And they raise a few cattle, and they're the person in your community that has the space, and they raise cattle for the whole community. I think that's really how we as a society achieve self-sufficiency if needed, and if that's your desire. I think about the village model that we've seen in human history, right? Most of us live in or around a city, and we're very reliant on that big village to help us survive. But if needed, I think that a small group of people, and I don't know the number, I've thought about this a little bit, maybe it's 5, 10, 15 people, I'm not sure, maybe it's a couple families. If they were to band together, kind of embrace that village mentality, I do think the life of producing your own food is actually possible. And it's something really cool to explore. I don't know where life will take me. I love gardening, but I also love all of the infrastructure that's built around me living near a city. But it's crossed my mind maybe down the road as I enter my older years to explore this topic, to explore living more in a village rather than in a mass community that provides everything you need and allows you to live in isolation. But this sort of living in a village it poses a lot of challenges, right? It poses a ton of challenges. There's a lot of convenience that comes from living in, near, around a city. And when you get close with people, and you rely on other people in a very, very intimate way, we'll say, people are tough. I'm tough, right? We as humans, we're unpredictable. We come with a lot of mess, and living in a village of that close, again, the word intimacy just comes to mind, would pose a lot of challenges. And I've been doing some research and doing some reading about people that have done it well, creating these things like eco villages or eco villages. Is certainly intriguing. So, where my mind goes from here is exploring those thoughts a little bit more, exploring how I can apply some of those to myself. Continuing to garden around here, both for food production, but more importantly, just because I love it, and to add plants for pollinators and to add something that's beautiful, and to spend my time outside in the dirt. But I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope it got you thinking. I would love to hear some of the questions that you all have in the comments below so we can kind of interact. I know there's a lot of thoughts about this topic here. I'd love to hear where you disagree with me. I'd love to hear where you agree with me. And yeah, let's just keep this conversation going. I think it's a really healthy conversation to have. So thanks so much for joining me on a talk in my garden, and we'll talk very soon.